Wee-Bey is one of the clearest examples in The Wire of a man who understands exactly where he stands. He is dangerous, respected, feared, and useful, but he never mistakes those things for being the same as power. That is what makes him different from so many people around him. In the Barksdale Organization, almost everyone is trying to move, prove, rise, survive, or pretend they are something bigger than they are. D'Angelo wants respect, but cannot live with the cost of the work. Wallace wants to be in the game until the game becomes real. Stringer wants to turn street power into corporate power. Avon wants to protect the old structure. Even Bodhi later on slowly begins to understand that being loyal does not mean the system will be loyal back. But Wee-Bey understands his role from the beginning. He is muscle. He is enforcement. He is the man Avon sends when the situation has moved past talking. And the key thing is that Bey does not seem offended by that. He does not act like he is above it. He does not spend the show complaining that he deserves more. He does not try to become Avon, and he does not try to become Stringer. He knows the value of his position, but he also knows the ceiling of it. That is rare in The Wire, because the show is full of people who are destroyed by misunderstanding their place. D'Angelo is the best contrast. D'Angelo is born close to power, but emotionally he is never built for the place he has been given. He has the Barksdale name behind him, so the young dealers in the pit are supposed to respect him. But that respect is unstable because everyone can sense the gap between the name and the man. D'Angelo wants to be seen as serious, but he also wants to be decent. He wants the benefits of the family business without fully accepting what the family business requires. That makes him uncomfortable in almost every room he enters. Wee-Bey has none of that confusion. When he walks into a room, he knows exactly what he is there for. You see it in the way he carries himself around Avon. Bey is close enough to Avon to be trusted with violent work, sensitive work, and personal protection. That means he has status. He is not some random corner boy waiting to be noticed. He is not one of the disposable teenagers in the pit. He sits closer to the center of the organization than most people ever will. But when Avon speaks, Bey listens. When Avon wants something handled, Bey handles it. There is no visible resentment, no attempt to debate the philosophy of the move, no little performance where he tries to show he is smarter than the order. That matters because in a criminal hierarchy, knowing when not to speak is part of surviving. Bey's authority comes from discipline. He is not important because he talks the most. He is important because when something must happen, Avon can trust that it will happen. That is why Bey fits so cleanly inside the Barksdale structure. Avon is the boss, Stringer is the strategist, the lieutenants manage the business, the corner boys move the product, and Wee-Bey exists as the threat behind all of it. He is the reason orders have weight. He is the physical consequence of disrespecting the organization. But he does not confuse consequence with command. A lot of street characters in The Wire mistake violence for leadership. They think being feared means being in charge. Bey understands the difference. Violence gives him value, but it does not make him the boss. His job is not to decide the whole direction of the organization. His job is to protect the organization's decisions once they have been made. That is a very specific kind of intelligence. It is not school intelligence. It is not Stringer's business class intelligence. It is not Lester's investigative intelligence. Bey has a different kind of awareness. He understands the rules of the world he lives in. He understands what people expect from him. He understands how far he can go. Most importantly, he understands what happens when a man reaches beyond his assigned role. The Orlando situation shows this clearly. Orlando wants to be more than what he is. He runs the club, but he wants to be involved in the drug side. He sees money moving around him and thinks proximity means permission. But Avon and Stringer understand hierarchy better than he does. The club is useful because it is clean enough to serve as a front. Orlando's value is tied to staying in that lane. The moment he tries to step outside it, he becomes a liability. Wee-Bey is on the other side of that mistake. He does not need anyone to explain to him why Orlando is a problem. He knows what happens when someone who is only supposed to hold one position tries to claim another. Orlando misunderstands his place and pays for it. Bey understands his place and survives longer because of it. The same pattern appears after the shooting of Kima. That whole disaster happens because the organization's attempt to control a situation turns messy. Orlando is killed, Kima is shot, and suddenly the heat becomes enormous. In that moment, Bey does not emotionally collapse. He does not start making speeches about loyalty. He does not pretend the situation is anything other than what it is. A mistake has happened, the police pressure will become unbearable, and loose ends have to be handled. This is where Bey's role becomes ugly, but also very clear. When Little Man becomes a risk, Bey removes the risk. That is the job. It is cold, but inside the logic of the Barksdale Organization, it makes sense. Bey does not treat the order like a personal betrayal. He does not seem shocked that a man who was useful yesterday can become disposable today. He already understands that this is how the machine works. That is why he can function inside it. The game does not shock him. It does not disappoint him. It does not need to explain itself to him. He has already accepted its rules. And that acceptance is what makes his arrest so important. When Bey is finally caught, he does not behave like a man who thought he was untouchable. He does not fall apart because the system has finally reached him. He handles it almost like another assignment. He knows that once he is facing life, the question becomes what he can still do for the organization and what the organization can still do for him. So he takes murders, he absorbs weight, he becomes useful even in defeat. That is one of the strongest examples of Bey understanding hierarchy. A lower level soldier might panic. A more ambitious man might try to save himself by giving up people above him. A confused man might start talking because he suddenly realizes the organization will not save him. But Bey already knows the deal. He knows Avon is more important to the structure than he is. He knows Stringer is more important to the structure than he is. He knows that if somebody has to disappear into prison forever, it makes more sense for it to be the soldier than the king. That does not mean he is stupid. It means he understands the bargain he made. His loyalty is not innocent. It is transactional, but not in a cheap way. Bey takes the weight because he expects the organization to take care of his people. He has a family, he has a son, he has a life outside the violence, even if the show only lets us see pieces of it. By accepting his place, he protects what can still be protected. That is why the scene around his confession does not feel like a normal defeat. It feels like a man performing the last duty of his rank. He is not free anymore, but he is still Wee-Bey. He still has value. He still has rules. He still knows what he owes and what is owed back. Even the way he talks about his fish adds to this. On the surface, it is almost funny. This feared enforcer, this man connected to bodies and shootings and organizational violence, cares deeply about his fish tanks, but it is not random. The fish show another side of him: routine, control, territory, responsibility. He likes systems he can manage. He likes knowing what each thing needs to stay alive. In a strange way, that mirrors how he sees the street. Everyone has a tank. Everyone has a role. If the conditions are wrong, people die. The fish also make him feel less chaotic than other violent characters. Bird is loud, reckless, and hateful. Stinkum has ambition and movement, but not the same level of weight. Little man panics under pressure. Bey is different. Bey is stable. That stability is why Avon trusts him. He does not need to be constantly reassured. He does not need to be watched every second. He can be sent into serious situations because his identity is not fragile. That is the real psychology of Wee-Bey. He is secure inside a brutal role. Most people need to tell themselves a story to live with what they do. D'Angelo tries to explain the game through chess, but the more he explains it, the more he seems trapped by it. Stringer tells himself he is becoming a businessman because he does not want to be limited by the street. Avon tells himself he is preserving a way of life because the corners are tied to his identity. Naaman's mother tells herself that the street name should pass from father to son because status is the only inheritance she understands. Bey does not seem to need much of a story. He is a soldier. That is enough. But the show does not make that look heroic. It makes it look useful, tragic, and limited. Bey's clarity helps him survive the rules of the game, but it does not free him from them. In fact, the better he understands the hierarchy, the more completely he belongs to it. He knows his place so well that he can walk himself into a life sentence without the kind of panic another man would show. That is the trap. Understanding the system does not mean escaping the system. Bey's later scenes with Naaman make this even deeper. By season 4, Bey is in prison, but his name still has power outside. Delonda uses that name like a weapon. She wants Naaman to become a version of his father. She wants him on the corner, acting hard, earning money, carrying the family's street reputation. To her, hierarchy is inheritance. Wee-Bey was respected, so Naaman should be respected. Wee-Bey was feared, so Naaman should learn to be feared. But Bey sees what she refuses to see. Naaman is not built for it. That moment is one of the most important things the show does with Bey, because it proves his understanding of hierarchy is not just about obedience. It is also about recognition. He can look at his own son and admit the truth. Naaman has the name, the posture, the clothes, and the attitude, but he does not have the nature. He is playing a role that will eventually destroy him. Bey understands that because Bey knows what the role actually requires. This is where he becomes almost brutally honest. He does not romanticize himself. He does not act like being Wee-Bey is something every boy should aspire to. He knows the cost. He knows what it takes to be the man people think his son should become. And when Bunny Colvin offers Naaman a different path, Bey does something that goes against the emotional logic of the street. He lets him go. That is not weakness. That is clarity. He understands that Naaman's place is not in the same hierarchy. He understands that forcing a boy into the wrong position will not make him strong. It will only expose him. Delonda sees the street like a stage where her son can perform the family legacy. Bey sees it like a machine that eats people who do not fit. And because he knows the machine from the inside, his judgment carries weight. That is what separates him from characters who only understand status from the outside. Delonda likes the benefits of the name, but she does not seem to understand the full burden of earning it. Naaman likes acting tough, but he cannot handle real confrontation. D'Angelo has a powerful last name, but it does not give him the stomach for the work. Orlando has access to the organization, but not permission to move inside it. Ziggy, on the dock side of the show, makes a similar mistake in a different world. He wants respect from a system that only sees him as a joke. Wee-Bey does not make that mistake. He never seems confused about whether he is respected. He is, but he also knows respect does not mean freedom. It does not mean safety. It does not mean he can suddenly become something else. His respect exists inside a chain of command. And once that chain of command requires sacrifice, he is the kind of man who can be sacrificed. That is why his loyalty is both impressive and disturbing. On one hand, Bey is exactly what every organization wants: reliable, quiet, disciplined, and willing to carry consequences. On the other hand, that same reliability is what makes him usable. The Barksdale Organization does not need to trick him. It does not need to sell him some fake dream. It only needs him to keep being what he already is. A man like Bey is powerful in the street, but only within the narrow boundaries given to him. He can intimidate, he can kill, he can protect Avon, he can silence problems, he can take charges, he can keep his mouth shut, but he cannot change the shape of the game. He cannot stop the police from building cases. He cannot stop Stringer from making decisions above him. He cannot stop the younger generation from being pulled into the same structure. And until Namond, he does not really try. That is what makes the Namond decision so important. It is the one moment where Bey uses his authority not to preserve the game, but to interrupt it. He cannot save himself. He cannot undo the bodies. He cannot step back into the world and become a different man. But he can look at his son and say, in effect, this boy does not belong where I belonged. That is the closest Bey gets to wisdom beyond the game. And it works because it comes from a man who has no illusions left. Wee-Bey's whole character is built on the difference between knowing your role and being trapped by it. He knows he is not Avon. He knows he is not Stringer. He knows he is not a businessman, not a politician, not a dreamer, not a reformer. He is the soldier who makes the organization's threats real. He understands the hierarchy so well that he can move through it without the insecurity that destroys other men. But The Wire never lets that become simple admiration. The show respects his discipline, but it also shows the outcome of that discipline. He ends up in prison for life, remembered as a legend by people who will never pay the same price. His name still carries weight, but his body is locked away. His loyalty protects the structure, but the structure continues without him. That is the truth of Wee-Bey. He understood his place better than almost anyone. He knew the rules, followed the chain, accepted the cost, and never mistook closeness to power for ownership of power. But in The Wire, understanding the hierarchy does not make a man free. Sometimes it only makes him better at serving the system that eventually buries him.